So on the first day of unleavened bread, we talked about the night to be observed and all the things that happened that we believe Yah wants us to remember on that solemn observance. And of course, the first one, and I don't even remember what I said now, but the first one was that evening, right? The evening of unleavened bread is when they came out of Egypt with a high hand. They walked out. And Yah wants us. So, and that again is Exodus 12, verse 42, the night to be much observed when they walked out with a high hand. And then we also talked about that is the day, of course, Yahusha died and his soul entered into Sheol around 3 p.m. The darkness on the earth was from high noon on the first day of unleavened bread till about 3 p.m. when he died. The darkness, and then that's when the veil of the temple was ripped open. And then that evening, and we put that video out there that Pilate, he couldn't have been placed in the tomb prior to sundown. First of all, because Joseph of Arimathea went to ask for the body after the sun had set. He was faithfully keeping the first day of unleavened bread. It's a high holy time. So the sun had set, and that's when he even initiated asking for Yahusha's body. So obviously, he entered into the tomb way sometime in the middle of the night because they had to get him down, they had to get his body cleaned, all the spices and everything applied, the linen. It even said he bought the linen after sundown to wrap his body. So all that took hours, and he had to have help. Nicodemus helped him, and their servants helped him. So, and then I did mention Genesis 15. So I firmly believe Genesis 15, all that happened, and we'll go through that. But then, and I did remember that Linda and Christina thought that was Shavuot. So I thought, let me just put this to rest. I need to understand whether this was Shavuot or the first day of unleavened bread or the evening. It's when the torch and the smoking went through the pieces, and we'll get into that. So if you go to chapter 14 of Jubilees, that's where the Jubilees version of this is. And in verse 1, it says, After these things, in the fourth year of this week, on the new moon of the third month, the word of Yah came to Abram in a dream, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy defender, thy reward, thy exceedingly great reward. And we'll see that plays out Genesis 15. So I kept reading, kept studying. So, and after we've talked about all this, I think you need to X through the new moon of the third month in verse 1 of chapter 14. It should read, After these things in the fourth year of this week on the new moon of the first month. And then in verse 10, it goes on and it says, And he took all these things in the middle of the month, meaning the 15th day of the first month. So, um, so we'll start in Genesis 14, but then we'll go through and prove out why that this does have to be the unleavened bread. And so the evening where Abram he's out and Yahusha, the smoking torch, the smoking oven, walking through those pieces separated after sundown, that is the night to be observed. And it ties in that covenant with Abram. It ties in them walking out of Egypt and Yahusha entering the grave. And that's all the night to be observed. So let's go to Genesis 14. And again, y'all, just ask questions, add comments. So if you start out in Genesis 14, this is the all these kings fighting, right? And just giving you the timestamp. This is when Lot was taken from Sodom. Uh, Genesis 14:12. They also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods and departed. So Abram heard about it. He sends his trained um, servants, 318 trained servants, and they pursued these kings as far as Dan. That's chapter 14. So after verse 16, so Abram brought back all the goods, brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shavah, that is the king's valley, after his return from the defeat of, I don't even know how to say that, Shadowlamar. Christina can clean that up. And the kings who were with him. Okay, here's the key, verse 18. And I think this is interesting, verse 18. And but that's, well, that's, well, let's see. No, sorry, that's the 17th. Okay,
Missy, can I just point out too that in verse 15 it says that he divided himself against them, he and his servants by night. I think that part is important too.
right. Absolutely. And then the 18th, of course, is Yahusha's resurrection, right?
Yep.
I think a nod to who Melchizedek is. I'll just throw that out there. So Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was the priest of Elohim Most High. So obviously, I believe that's Yahusha, and what is he doing? Bringing bread and wine. That's the Passover time stamp. So the sun is going down. We're in twilight, and here comes Melchizedek with bread and wine. So there's a timestamp right there. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram of Elohim Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be Elohim Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. So Abram gave Yahusha a tithe of all. So that's another long story. So just keep going though. Now we're swapping to verse 15. After these things, after what things? All the fighting, the war, the getting back Lot, Melchizedek coming. So, and then he came to Abram in a vision, saying, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward. And that exactly ties into chapter 14 of Jubilees. So you can kind of track and go through. But Abram said, Yah, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is the Eleazar of Damascus? And then Abram said, look, you've given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is not my heir. And verse 4, the word of Yah came to him, saying, this one will not be your heir, but one that shall come from your own body. Of course, prophesying of Isaac here. Verse 5 is key for me. So then he, Yahusha, brings him outside and says, look now toward the heaven, count the stars if you are able to number them. So this is the evening still of Passover. It's in the middle of the night in a vision. It's nighttime. He's seeing the stars and he's saying, so will your descendants be if you can count the stars. So, verse 6, and he believed in Yah, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. And then it goes on, and then he says, so now I think at some point it turns into daytime the next day, which is the first day of unleavened bread, right?
Mhm.
Because he said, how, so Abraham in verse 8, Elohim, how shall I know I will inherit it? And so Yahusha said to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, turtle dove, and young pigeon. So he brought all these to him and cut them in two. That would be the next day. So he has to look for
Oh,
perfect.
Mitzi, I'm so
Yeah.
sorry because
Yeah.
I am kind of realizing right now that I am seeing this a little bit differently than you. Can I just, do you mind if I just explain?
Sure. No, go
Okay.
right ahead.
And listen, I could be wrong, okay? But I am seeing that verse 15 of chapter 14, he divided himself, he and his servants by night. I'm thinking that that's Passover night. And then that by the next day, I'm thinking, it does turn into day, and that's when Melchizedek breaks bread with him, and this is the first day of unleavened bread. Is that what you're seeing too, just in chapter 14?
No, I think Yahusha would not bring bread and wine until it might be the next evening. Like he might have defeated those kings on the 13th. I don't know, but in
I'm sorry,
my
I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, did I say the 13th? I meant the 4th. I'm thinking that by night in verse 14 is Passover night.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I am thinking on in verse 18, this is unleavened bread when Melchizedek brings bread and wine. Is that unleavened bread to you, or do you think this is still Passover?
No, I think it's still Passover. I think this, I mean, and we can disagree, but I think
You
so.
might be right. You might be right. You totally may
Because if you
still be in the
like
middle of the night. That does make sense. I see.
yeah, he comes at sundown. We don't know exactly the
Yeah, there's no
timeline.
daybreak. I will give that to you. I'm not seeing a daybreak
Right,
here. Okay. But I,
right.
I just want to figure out here when we're now in verse 15, this is 1:15. Is this unleavened bread to you?
Chapter 15.
Yeah.
I think it's the nighttime prior to unleavened bread. I think he goes and gets the animals and cuts them in two during the daylight portion of unleavened bread.
Yeah, okay, so I guess what I'm thinking here is that after these things, that's kind of it becomes day, and the word came to Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, I am thy shield, thy exceedingly great reward. And he starts talking to him. I believe, this is 1:15, I believe.
Well, he takes him outside and shows him the stars, though.
Oh, that's true. Where,
And
where,
now he says, verse 5, look now toward the heaven and count the stars if you're able to number them.
okay, all right, yep, okay, good. All right.
So now I'll give you this, the Melchizedek bringing Passover. I was just assuming it was sundown, but technically I think it could be any time between sundown and midnight. I do think you need to have completed Passover by midnight.
Okay.
So
But this is prior to the first Passover where the instructions were given for Passover. It's what
right in the night sometime, but I'm just saying I think Yahusha, there's no way. Um, so he brings it that evening of the 14th, and then the 15th is when Abram gets the he feels a little bit of what Yahusha feels when he's dying on the cross,
Okay,
right?
hold on, because what I just need to know then is in chapter 15, at what point does it turn in today? Because I see what you're saying here. He's looked towards the heaven, tell me the stars, because when does it turn into the day, do you think?
Well, that's what I mean. He's talking to him, I think, throughout the night, turning the day. And then verse 9, when he tells him to bring him these animals, I was just gonna say, obviously, to sacrifice an animal, you have to validate they are perfect. You
Right.
can't do that during the night.
Okay, so
Right.
at least
And
by
then
verse 9, it's daytime.
right.
Yes.
And then 12 confirms that because then it says, and it came to be when the sun was going down.
Right, right.
Right. Right. So that's how it is in my brain is when Melchizedek brings the bread and wine, you're at the 14th that evening at some point.
Yeah.
And then he partakes the bread and the wine with Melchizedek. And then later in the evening, he has the vision. I'm thinking he's awakened. Yahusha takes him outside and says, count the stars. If you can count them, I promise you that's going to be your descendants. And then Abram goes into, well, who? I don't even have an heir from my body. And then he says, how will I know you're going to do this for me? Now, at this point, I think it's probably turned into daytime. And then Yahusha's telling him, bring me these animals. I'm personally thinking it's high noon at this point. I've always heard they would always check for perfect animals at high noon or when there's no shadow, right? And that is when precisely Yahusha goes on the cross, noon to 3, or right before that, right? He's
Yeah,
on the
that makes
cross.
sense.
So it's going to take him probably 3 hours to find the animals, to ensure their perfection, to cut them in half and be careful not to break any bones, fillet them out. And then and then that's where we are. We were clearly in the daylight portion of the first day of unleavened bread when Yahusha goes through his scourging, the crucifixion. So, and then verse 11, here come the vultures. They come down on the carcasses, and Abram drove them away. And you made a point about, I think it's in Jubilees, where Abraham was great at chasing away the crows that had been eating all their seeds when they would plant them, and also the the parable of the sower. He would throw the seeds, and a lot of birds would come and eat the seeds before it could plant in men's hearts. I see vultures as unclean birds, as the fallen angels and demons again. And I kind of saw this as, when Yahusha is being scourged and he's on the cross, the Father literally turned his back on him. Unlike us, who the Father promises to never leave us nor forsake us, he forsook Yahusha so he could feel the entire weight of the sins of the world on his shoulders. Not only did Yah turn away from him, he didn't give him any help. He withstood all the people mocking him, saying junk to him. Not only that, you better believe Satan and his demons were tormenting him, and he had no help. He endured it all. And I think that's what this is showing. That's just my opinion. So Abram was trying to drive the vultures away from the carcasses, and I'm sure Yahusha was too. He mentally overcame them, spiritually overcame them. He is literally our King and Savior. So now, when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. I do think this was Yah giving Abram a little bit of an inkling of what Yahusha was going to feel that day, right? And then the great darkness represents the darkness on the earth from noon to 3. When the Creator was dying, the earth felt a little bit of that too. It
Uh,
went dark.
I mean, Yahusha is the light in Genesis on creation day 1, and the light was going out when his light was going out.
There you go. The creator was dying. And then he said to Abram, no, certainly your descendants will be strangers in the land that is not theirs, Egypt, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve, I will judge after they come out with great possessions. And when did they come out with great possessions? That very night after the sun had went down on the first day of unleavened bread. The same day Yahusha died, the same day Yahusha entered Sheol and entered the heart of the earth. Now, as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. But in the fourth generation, they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So he's promised him that they will have this land. So in that same year, right, um, they will be brought into the land of Canaan, and they also crossed over the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month in the same season. So, and then verse 17, here it is. And it came to pass when the sun went down and it was dark. So now is the night to be observed. There appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch. That's the same being that came down on Mount Sinai. That's the same being that led the Exodus folks with the cloud by day and the fire by night. This is none other than Yahusha. That burning torch passed between those pieces. On the same day, Yah made a covenant with Abram, saying, and that was the covenant, and he alone, it only depended on him. He was the only one walking through those pieces. Of course, Yah was as well, but no man. It did not depend on any man. It was a promise. To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. So I think you guys can see through all that. That is no doubt the evening of the first day of unleavened bread. So we wanted to make sure you all recognize that. And then I think you can go back to remember we had the 400 years versus the 430 years and how all those covenants tie together. So this date, Genesis 15, 1 through 21, the covenant when Yahusha, the smoking torch, walking through those parts, exactly 430 years later is exactly when the Israelites walked out of Egypt, the night to be observed. The 400 years comes into 30 years after that covenant is when Isaac was sacrificed on Mount Moriah, also on the first day of unleavened bread at 15 years of age. And between that event and the Israelites walking out of Egypt were 400 years. And then, Linda, explain your pieces of silver.
Yeah.
That's beautiful too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So back in when Abram where is it? I'm sorry, I just read it. I wrote it down. Okay, in Genesis 15:13, and he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. Um, Abram, if you remember, when Sarah died, he purchased the land. Was it from the Hivites or the Hittites? Does anybody remember where he purchased? He purchased,
Yeah, it's in Hebron but it was from a Hittite.
so he
Yeah.
purchased it for 400 pieces of silver. And then So what Mitzi was just saying, those 400 years are up until when Isaac was going to be sacrificed, and then Yah provided him a ram in place. And that was the lamb that, or that was the sacrifice that's required on the first day of unleavened bread for the firstborn, to redeem your firstborn. He provided the cost, like the blood covering of the ram. And Yahusha, when he was turned over to be sacrificed on the first day of unleavened bread, it was Judas that sold him for 30 pieces of silver. So the 30 pieces of silver added to Abraham's 400 pieces of silver for the plot of the land for the grave, it's 430. It's unbelievable.
How all that ties together.
Yeah. And also, I think what's really cool is that that 30 pieces of silver is also tied to the bride because the bride, I forget exactly where it is, but when a woman is redeemed, it's 30 pieces of silver.
30 pieces of silver is the price of a female slave, which is the bride. Yeah. And like the redeemed, redeeming the firstborn, who is our kinsman redeemer? And it points to Jubilees. So all this stuff ties together. Does all that make sense about Genesis 15 though being on the first day of unleavened bread? And I see it as so Pentecost is a major covenant. That's when he was born. But then the first day of unleavened bread at evening is also a major covenant, and that's pointing to his death. Without his death, we have no way of salvation. Right. And I think that covenant, when Yahushua was walking through those parts, that was the Father and the Son's agreement and promise that he on that same day would die for us all and be our kinsman redeemer to the whole world. So
So
we
I have
kind of thought that was pretty important and didn't want to leave that off, get too far away from that was part of the night to be observed. So sorry, go ahead.
I just had want to go back to Linda's statement when she said that Yahusha was the light. Um, when it says Genesis 1:3, the light was created. Is that what you were saying, that was
Yeah.
Yahusha?
Yeah,
So
he was the light that was before the sun on the fourth day in the world. And what my understanding is Yahusha represents light. Darkness is freedom of choice. You can accept the light or you can accept the darkness and turn from the light.
so the darkness that was, because he didn't create the darkness, correct?
He did create the darkness. But there was a void and darkness that was prior to the
Yeah.
creation of the world, but it does say, I think in Isaiah, that he created the darkness. I mean, it says so in Jubilees too, that he created the light and the dark.
Well, did he not create Satan? Of course he did. But he didn't create him that way. He chose to become that way. But Yah also knew he would choose to become that way.
So the darkness isn't Satan being created on that first day also.
No, I don't think so, personally. But
Yeah, I mean, Satan just turned from Yahusha, and that's freedom of choice. Like he was the first. I mean, I'm pretty sure
yeah, yeah,
the
he
first to
he
choose.
had free will just like all the rest of Yah's created beings, whether human, angel, or whatever.
So you're thinking that the darkness is the free will then.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that's my belief.
Yeah. And another thing, so the time we're entering into now, so Yah has put up with all this mess for 6,000 years, right? And he's given free will to the angels, he's given free will to humans. He's given them, all of us have at least had access to the information to be able to choose between who we are going to be slaves to, right? Paul goes through that. You're either slaves to righteousness or slaves to sin. There's no fence to ride on. No choice is a choice. So I do believe the times we are entering into, Yah is forcing all of his creation to choose. Choose the master this day whom you will serve. And it's just like kind of like Isaiah or Elijah, uh, right? Baal versus Yahweh. Choose whom you will serve. Remember, and he made fun of all of um, Bill's priest jumping around, cutting themselves. What's he doing? Is he in the bathroom? Where is he? What's he doing? You know, that is the most hilarious thing. But that I think this is the time where y'all's like, I've had enough. I've come to the end of the time. Everyone is going to choose, and that is what I believe the Great Tribulation is doing. He starts with the angels in heaven. Choose your side. You're not going to stand back and watch and stay neutral. Choose your side. He forced them, is forcing them to choose a side. If you go with Satan, you're going with Satan. If you stay with me, you're going to stay with me. And then it comes to the earth, the great testing, the trial of humanity, right? A time which never has been nor will be again. Everyone will be shoved off their fence, shoved off. They're not making a decision. You will choose. You will choose between
Just like,
Baal
yeah.
and, and Yah.
And
Yeah.
just like in the original Exodus, they also went through their trials. Remember uh, the men who came up against Moshe because they were jealous that they got the priesthood, even though they were given a job within the temple. Korah and his band. It wasn't enough that they got a most excellent job. They wanted to take the priesthood also. So in their rebellion, Yah punished them as well. Even with the idolatry, he's taking everybody out who say that they're going to follow him, and he's going to test them, and he will get rid of the rebellious.
Right.
So it's going to happen all over again.
Yep. And I forget where it is. I'll try to find it. But even in the first Exodus, they were carrying around their idolatrous trinkets from their gods. And they carried them the whole way. Some of them did. So the point being, this time, you are not entering that promised land hanging on to anything that is not of Yah, physically or spiritually. And he is cleaning house and he will have no more of it. So I just think, we need to understand the days we're in and continue to clean our houses and continue to keep our oil flowing.
Yeah, I think it comes down to two choices, light or darkness. The tree of life or the tree of wisdom, evil. Choose Barabbas or Yahusha. And he just always gives us a choice.
Yep. Amen.